Chapter 19. The daily controversy manifests its desolating enmity. L.R. Conradi, one of the most bitter opponents of the 1888 messengers, was the first to publish the new view on the daily. Robert Wieland suggests that Conradi's new view grew out of his 1888 opposition.
Conradi's new view grew out of his opposition to the 1888 message and identification of Luther as herald of the third angel's message in verity. It displaces Jones and Waggoner's concept of righteousness by faith.
Footnote. Robert Wieland, Have We Followed Cunningly Devised Fables? 1984. Page 10.
Conradi wrote to Ellen White for advice on his new theory of the daily, and strangely there appeared to have been no reply.
L.R. Conradi, president of the Union Conference in Europe, had been the first to publish the new interpretation in his widely circulated book on the prophecies of Daniel. But that book was in German. The great irony was that its publication caused not a ripple either in Europe or in the United States, a perhaps unanticipated advantage of foreign languages. Before the publication, he had asked Ellen White to advise him if she saw a problem with his interpretation. Receiving no response, he had assumed she had no objection and had gone ahead with the printing.
Footnote. Gilbert Valentine, W. W. Prescott, Forgotten Giant of Adventism's Second Generation, Review and Herald, 2005, page 217.
As Conradi was in Europe, he shared his views with Waggoner, who had been stationed in England since 1892. Prescott, at Waggoner's suggestion, was sent to England in late 1897, shortly before Conradi published his new view on the daily in Europe. Wieland provides an interesting brushstroke of history in detailing the spread of the new view.
This outline suggests that Louis R. Conradi deflected our compass by introducing his new view about 1900. One of the first to accept this view, E.J. Waggoner, forthwith repudiated Ellen White, for he saw clearly that she upheld the pioneer's view. This was the beginning of his apostasy. Next, W. W. Prescott embraced Conradi's view, followed by A.G. Daniels, the General Conference president.
Footnote. Wieland, Have We Followed Cunningly Devised Fables? Page 6.
The latter part of the decade of the 1890s culminated in the era of kingly power.
Now I want to say God has not put any kingly power in our ranks to control this or that branch of the work. The work has been greatly restricted by the efforts to control it in every line. There must be a renovation, a reorganization. A power and strength must be brought into the committees that are necessary. General Conference Bulletin, April 3, 1901, page 26, paragraphs 2 and 5.
The darkness stemming from the rebellion of 1888 was weaving its tentacles around the hearts of many leaders in the movement. Even though Jones and Waggoner pushed back on dictatorial leadership, when given the chance to lead, they also exercised dictatorial tendencies. The enmity that had created a middle wall of partition between brethren hid the deeper unconscious enmity towards the Son of God. The fury of the he-goat towards the ram now manifested itself in the new view of the daily. It became the ultimate expression of Adventist appeasement theology, projecting man's need for physical blood into heaven as a requirement of the Father to grant us grace. It is the issue of hidden enmity that lay as the root cause of why both the 1888 messengers and many of their opposers found atonement together in the new view of the daily. It provided an unwitting excuse to keep their enmity alive. Conradi formalized into the subject of the daily the thoughts that Crozier first entered upon, although Conradi had not specifically built upon Crozier's position. Conradi
came to believe that Daniel 8:13 referred to a papal counterfeit of the continuous mediatorial work of Christ in heaven. He concluded that this heavenly ministry was signified by the Tamid that is taken away and replaced by a service of a different kind.
Footnote. Kaiser, History of the Interpretation of the Daily, page 41.
In 1899, after discussions with Conradi, Prescott raised Conradi's view with his colleagues in England, but some of them were troubled by it.
It disturbed E. E. Andros enough, for example, that he informed Haskell. Prescott also later discussed the idea with Daniels and Uriah Smith. Like Haskell and Andros, the interpretation did not impress Smith either.
Footnote: Valentine, Prescott, page 217.
The following year, the views of Waggoner in regard to organisation, which Ellen White warned against, were pressed by Waggoner in a workers' meeting in Redhill, England, in February of 1900. Present at this meeting were Waggoner, Elder Meredith, and a number of other prominent church employees, including W. W. Prescott, J. N. Loughborough, E. E. Andros, H. E. Armstrong, brother-in-law of Waggoner, H. Champness, and J. S. Washburn.
The meeting had been progressing for 4 days, with Prescott and Waggoner serving as the main speakers. But each day the situation grew more tense as J. N. Loughborough began to express his disagreements with Prescott and Waggoner over slitting remarks regarding the authority of Ellen White. The clashes were especially tense between Waggoner and Loughborough, with Waggoner being described as quite aggressive and dogmatic. In marked contrast, Loughborough exhibited meekness, yet it was meekness tempered with a demeanor that was very decisive and sure in his response to Waggoner.
Footnote: Woodrow Whidden, E. J. Waggoner, Review and Herald, 2008, page 248.
Waggoner and Prescott lived next door to each other for some time in England. At that time, after many discussions, they had aligned on a number of issues relating to the subject of sanctification in relation to the gospel, as well as the subject of health. Another subject that Prescott and Waggoner aligned on was the subject of the daily.
According to Andros, a new theological issue, the daily of Daniel 8:13 caught the attention of the pair, and what they did with it perplexed him just as much.
Footnote: Valentine, Prescott, page 136.
Prescott later moderated his views on organisation, but at the time he may have expressed similar spiritualised thoughts to Waggoner on organisation, to which Loughborough objected. But the fact that both men were said to have had slitting remarks over the spirit of prophecy suggests that the subject of the daily was included in the conflict because of how Loughborough understood Ellen White's early writing statement that the pioneers had the correct view of the daily. When Prescott returned to the USA, he and Daniels faced the Kellogg crisis, with A.T. Jones aligned with Kellogg against Daniels and Prescott. The Kellogg crisis delayed Prescott and Daniels from advancing their new views on the daily until 1907.
Footnote: Valentine, Prescott, page 217.
In the context of enmity between brethren, Satan finds that his human targets are often easy to alienate from each other. One of the driving wedges between Daniels and Kellogg was Daniels' rejection of Spirit of Prophecy counsel on red meat.
A.G. Daniels apparently never gained the victory over red meat, and indeed may not have put up much of a fight. As late as 1919, on a visit to Japan, he advised the missionary family with which he stayed to supplement their Asian diet with meat. This unconcern about something so important to Kellogg continually irritated him and fed his undercurrent of distrust towards the ministry.
Footnote: Benjamin MacArthur, A.G. Daniels, Review and Herald, 2015, page 184.
When Daniels refused to put up the money to fund Kellogg's ambitions for a new health centre in England, Kellogg, determined to have his way, tried to pressure Daniels on the issue.
Then Kellogg called Daniels into a washroom for a private conversation. What followed was, in Daniels' later description, the greatest crisis of my life since first surrendering my heart to God. While blocking Daniels' exit through the door, Kellogg harangued him for 2 hours with every imaginable argument, including a threat that Ellen White would roll him over in the dust if he remained obdurate. But throughout the unrelenting lecture, Daniels testified, he heard another voice that would not budge, There would be no purchase until funds were donated. Kellogg finally stalked away, muttering that he could not work with Daniel's cash policy.
Footnote: MacArthur, A. G. Daniels, page 187 and 188.
The enmity that the acceptance of the 1888 message could have cleansed from the soul was firmly in the heart of Kellogg, and as A.T. Jones came more and more under his influence, so too did Jones's enmity for all who stood in his way. Ellen White wrote of Jones in 1903,
I told him, Jones, that J.H. Kellogg was acting a part in connection with the cause of God that would unsettle many souls. He has gone directly against the testimonies of the Spirit of God, and how long his brethren were to sustain him in his deceptive course I could not determine. That A.T. Jones was acting like a man with his eyes put out. E.G.W. to Willie White. Letters and Manuscripts, Volume 18, Letter 293, August 16, 1903, Paragraph 9.
Then again in 1906.
During the General Conference at Tacoma Park, Elder Jones's case was again presented to me. After this, I had a long conversation with him in which I pointed out his danger, but he was self-confident and declared to me that Dr. Kellogg believed the truth and the testimonies just as firmly as the rest of us believed and advocated them. In this conversation, Elder Jones manifested that which had been revealed to me regarding him, that in the place of receiving the warnings, he was full of self-confidence, that he had exalted himself, and in the place of being prepared to help Dr. Kellogg, he had united with him to disbelieve and distrust and falsely to accuse the ministers and others who were trying to save Dr. Kellogg and other physicians who were in peril. E.G.W. to Dr. Paulson, April 2, 1906. Letters and Manuscripts, Volume 21, Letter 116, 1906, Paragraph 7. I warned Elder Jones, but he felt that he was not in the least danger, but the fine threads have been woven about him, and he is now a man deluded and deceived. Though claiming to believe the testimonies, he does not believe them. E.G.W. to Dr. Paulson, April 2, 1906. Letters and Manuscripts, Volume 21, Letter 116, 1906, Paragraph 11. I am sorry for A.T. Jones, who has been warned over and over again. Notwithstanding these warnings, he has allowed the enemy to fill his mind with thoughts of self-importance. Heed not his words, for he has rejected the plainest light and has chosen darkness instead. The Holy One hath given us messages clear and distinct, but some poor souls have been blinded by the falsehoods and the deceptive influences of satanic agencies, and have turned from truth and righteousness to follow these fallacies of satanic origin. Letters and Manuscripts, Volume 21, Manuscript 39, 1906, Paragraph 5.
Waggoner's close association influenced Jones into the new view of the daily, which he promoted in his 1905 book, The Consecrated Way to Christian Perfection.
Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. This plainly points out that which took away the priesthood, the ministry, and the sanctuary of God and of Christianity. Let us read it again. Yea, he, the little horn, the man of sin, magnified himself even to the prince of the host, against the Prince of Princes Christ. And by him, the man of sin, the daily sacrifice, the continual service, the ministry, and the priesthood of Christ was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary, the sanctuary of the Prince of the host, of the Prince of Princes Christ, was cast down, and an host was given him, the man of sin, against the daily sacrifice, against the continual service of the ministry of Christ, the Prince of the host, by reason of transgression cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced, and prospered. It was by reason of transgression, that is, by reason of sin, that this power gained the host that was used to cast down the truth to the ground, to shut away from the church and the world Christ's priesthood, his ministry, and his sanctuary, and to cast it all down to the ground and tread it underfoot. It was by reason of transgression that this was accomplished. Transgression is sin, and this is the consideration and the revelation upon which the Apostle, in 2 Thessalonians, defines this power as the man of sin, and the mystery of iniquity.
Footnote: A.T. Jones, The Consecrated Way to Christian Perfection, pages 98-99.
In the same year that Jones released his book, Waggoner was divorced by his wife, who was in another relationship, so he immediately married his secretary, Edith Adams, whom he had desired to have for some years. Shortly after, Waggoner lost his credentials and membership. 2 years after Jones released his book, Ellen White wrote,
I want to say to you, brother and sister Starr, that the time we have so long anticipated has come. A.T. Jones has come to the place where he voices the mind and faith of Dr. Kellogg. They have now taken a decided stand against the truth, and special efforts will be made to lead souls away. This apostasy has cost us dearly. Warning after warning has been given to these men, but they have set themselves first to deny the messages and then to declare that they did not believe the testimonies. Their work against the truth has been as marked by deception as was the course of Canwright. Many whose sympathies were with Dr. Kellogg have united with him and have departed from the faith. Letters and Manuscripts, Volume 22, Letter 316, 1907, paragraphs 3 and 4.
It is of significant interest that a man who was exalting himself in self-confidence would around the same time embrace the new view of the daily. Again, we state the fact that the fury of the he-goat towards the ram is driven by Satan's false justice system, and out of this goat comes a power that exalts itself in self-confidence and enmity to the prince of the host. Its false justice, which requires blood, is then lifted up into the transgression of desolation. Unwittingly, Jones, Kellogg, Waggoner, and others were following the principles of the little horn. I do not believe it is a coincidence that Jones and Waggoner switched on the subject of the daily to lift up the blood sacrifice mediation of Jesus into heaven. These principles are perfectly aligned. The overarching theme is that the heart is not cleansed of enmity, judgment, and condemnation which require sacrifice. For those who have ears, discern the implications of these facts and be grounded in the foundations of the Advent message. It is beyond the scope of this book, but the principles of indignation connected to the demand for sacrifice find a natural bridge into the change of the Adventist Church's position from pacifism to non-combatancy, and then finally to the support of sending its young men to war as a sacrifice for the nation. It is not an accident that the man who most bitterly opposed the 1888 message would support the German war effort, persecuting those who resisted the support of the German war machine.
During the war, Conradi, tried to have the church members support the German war effort and persecute those who resisted, and caused a split in the Adventist Church and the formation of the Seventh-day Adventist Reform movement who resisted his decisions.
Footnote: wikipedia.org/wiki/Ludwig R. Conradi.
The connection between the justice system of penal substitution and its connection to the daily and the principles of war are worthy of closer examination. It is unfathomable that Adventists would have its members as high-ranking officers in the US military system.
Footnote: wikipedia.org/wiki/Barry Black.
In 2014, I attended a Seventh-day Adventist camp meeting in North Carolina. The speaker compared the US military to Gideon and his army fighting against evil. He asked for all Adventist members who had served in the US military to come to the front to receive a standing ovation for their service. In this patriotic enthusiasm, he then asked the congregation for $1 million for evangelism. The event left me feeling ill for days. Such was the abomination I witnessed by men with their back to the God of heaven. The same might be said for the sad history of Adventism and its wholesale slaughter of unborn infants through its abortion policy from the 1970s. Once again, the sacrifice of a child is perceived as warranted to preserve the life, or worse, lifestyle of the parents. The principles of abortion align with the dogma of Caiaphas. It is expedient that one should die rather than the whole nation, family, perish. Returning to the early 1900s, this does not mean that those who opposed the new view were free of the same indignation. While their position was correct, their inability to grasp the significance of the meaning of the daily in relation to the cleansing of the sanctuary left them vulnerable to the same enmity as those who were embracing the new view. They also continued to operate under the menace of false justice. This was evident in some of the blistering letters written by men such as Washburn and Holmes, who are notable examples of this indignation. It is at this point that we remember that the disciples of Jesus were all seeking to be the greatest and to sit on the right and left side of Jesus. Without drinking the true blood of Jesus, which is the spirit of sonship, the soul is drawn into seeking to exalt itself. The lifting up of the little horn requires the treading down of those who are also seeking the highest place. The blood of sonship is replaced with the blood of appeasement. The blood of life is replaced with the blood of death. Rivals must be condemned, rejected, and finally destroyed. The same words that Ellen White used to describe Jones, she used to describe Judas. It makes me tremble to the core. I feel my vulnerability, my weakness, and my great need in the contemplation of these things.
When the disciples entered the upper room, their hearts were full of resentful feelings. Judas pressed next to Christ on the left side, John was on the right. If there was a highest place, Judas was determined to have it, and that place was thought to be next to Christ. And Judas was a traitor. Another cause of dissension had arisen. At a feast it was customary for a servant to wash the feet of the guests, and on this occasion preparation had been made for the service. The pitcher, the basin, and the towel were there, but no servant was present, and it was the disciples' part to perform it. But each of the disciples, yielding to wounded pride, determined not to act the part of a servant. Looking at the disturbed countenances of his disciples, Christ rose from the table, and laying aside his outer garment, which would have impeded his movements, he took a towel and girded himself. Judas was the first whose feet Jesus washed. Judas had already closed the contract to deliver Jesus into the hands of the priests and scribes. Christ knew his secret, yet he did not expose him. He hungered for his soul. His heart was crying, "How can I give thee up?" He hoped that his act in washing Judas's feet would touch the heart of the erring disciple and save him from completing his act of disloyalty. And for a moment, the heart of Judas thrilled through and through with the impulse then and there to confess his sin. But he would not humble himself. He hardened his heart against repentance. He made no remonstrance, no protestation against the Savior thus humiliating himself. He was offended at Christ's act. If Jesus could so humble himself, he thought, he could not be Israel's king. Even Judas, had he repented, would have been received and pardoned. The guilt of his soul would have been washed away by the atoning blood of Christ. But, self-confident and self-exalted, cherishing a high estimate of his own wisdom, he justified his course. Manuscript 106, 1903. Christ Triumphant, page 262.
This is the spirit of Satan, the one who inspires all with his wicked character. It breaks the heart of the Father and his Son how men twist and dismiss their loving appeals as weak, and instead choose to follow Satan's path of self-exaltation.
A compassionate creator, in yearning pity for Lucifer and his followers, was seeking to draw them back from the abyss of ruin into which they were about to plunge. But his mercy was misinterpreted. Lucifer pointed to the long-suffering of God as an evidence of his own superiority, an indication that the King of the universe would yet accede to his terms. If the angels would stand firmly with him, he declared, they could yet gain all that they desired. He persistently defended his own course and fully committed himself to the great controversy against his Maker. Thus it was that Lucifer, the light-bearer, the sharer of God's glory, the attendant of his throne, by transgression became Satan, the adversary of God and holy beings and the destroyer of those whom heaven had committed to his guidance and guardianship. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 39.2.
This is what must be cleansed from the sanctuary: the spirit of self-exaltation, self-will, and self-confidence that produces enmity towards all who stand in the way, or who also seek the power and position that the self is seeking. In Satan's kingdom, that is every other being, and thus all beings who see things as Satan does, must eventually destroy each other. Kellogg, Jones, and Waggoner were now lost to the denomination, but the transgression of enmity would continue to desolate others in the movement.